Good afternoon and welcome to this Sharing 60 from Building People. My name is Rebecca Lovelace. I am the founder and chief Dr. Joiner at Building People, and we are a hub for equity, diversity and inclusion in the built environment. Our mission is to improve representation across the built environment by enabling and empowering a collaborative movement for inclusive change. And one of the ways in which we do this is by amplifying the voice of our network through events such as this Sharing 60. And Sharing 60 is all about bringing more people together, enabling the sharing of online equity, diversity and inclusion guidance for the built environment shared by the Building People Network. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to introduce Jan Peters today, who will be talking about inclusion score and ISO-30415, which is diversity, equity, inclusion and belonging. Jan will present, we'll have informal Q&A, and we're really looking forward to both hearing Jan's expertise, but also gaining from that and having an opportunity to discuss that within this group. So welcome everybody, and a huge welcome to you, Jan, and over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Rebecca. It's really a great pleasure to be here today. My mission today is to explore how we can be more systematic about diversity and inclusion, but also to raise awareness of how ISO 40315 and the impact that it can have for you and your business. But I also want to introduce you to a platform that's been built around the ISO so that can help you to manage your progress on diversity and inclusion. And I hope that you've got some questions that pop up as we're going through, and be delighted to have time at the end to answer them. And some of the challenges that we face today are that 78% of companies, according to quantib.com, have got a relatively immature DE&I initiative or programme in place. Disappointing, I find the fact that it's going to be 151 years before we close the global economic gender gap at all levels. But the thing that should really make your ears prick up today is the impact that the failing to address diversity and inclusion within your business properly exposes you to significant risk. And that is why Inclusion Score is focusing on and has really come together from the insurance sector. And what is the risk to your business? This Duke corporate education shows that the risk to a business is that for DEI challenges that are made to a business, your business will face a 3.1% loss on its market capitalisation over the 3 days when a story first breaks. So it's a significant thing to consider around why you really need to take diversity and inclusion more seriously and thread it into the very fabric of your business. If you may have noticed this week that Lloyd's of London is about to invest £65 million following the slavery report and the role that Lloyd's had in the slave trade. Lloyd's, of course, is a massive global insurance company. There's an article on Reuters that you can go and Google and find, but also there's an article in The Guardian from yesterday's newspaper about how it's understanding about how it can make an impact on changing the whole profile of the profession in the insurance sector, and how we can go about doing that. But also, how do insurance companies face and assess the risk to your business? If you look at one of the other articles that I'll be flagging up later, you'll see that I think it was here it is, Beasley Shaw, which is one of the Lloyd's companies, that if you have going for your insurance renewal and you've got an increase in your maturity of your diversity and inclusion approach, then you're going to have a renewed risk for your insurance profile. So it's really something to be taken seriously at the most senior levels in organisations. One of the biggest problems, I think, is that there's been too much emphasis on activity and not enough on outcomes. And there's lots of different examples of where that has been the case. So in the many reports that have been written about diversity and inclusion, is the growing size of that as a business. There's lots of consultancies out there, lots of people offering you help and support. But what are the things that you really need to be doing to make a difference? And how are you spending your hard-earned bottom line profits? How are you looking after that? And how are you contributing to this growth in the sector? Projected that the current £7.5 billion spent globally on diversity and inclusion initiatives is set to double in the next 3 years. This is data that's based on the spend in 2020. So as Rebecca mentioned, I'm Jan Peters, and I've been working on diversity and inclusion since 1999, when I was seconded to the Department for Trade and Industry. And in terms of the built environment, my involvement tracks back to 2000, which is when the Institution of Civil Engineers launched their first inclusion and equity programme. And I was running a conference at the time in my role at the DTI, and one of the speakers that had come over from America picked up the leaflet from the ICE, and we had an event there. And she said, "Oh, ice flow, is that the speed it's going to move at?" And when you look at the fact that we're now in 2023, so that's 23 years, there has indeed been progress, but it has been incredibly slow. Back in 2008, while I was president of the Women's Engineering Society, undertook the first safety clothing campaign and did a survey looking at PPE and the breadth of engagement across the provision of PPE. All sorts of different sectors use different kinds of PPE. And the stories that came out, well, if those weren't true, they were truly laughable. And that followed, the next thing that was of note is the Equality and Human Rights Commission did an investigation into race discrimination in the construction sector. And the report was presented in 2009, and the Construction Leadership Diversity Forum was then formed. I then won a tender to undertake what was initially going to be called a cost-benefit analysis of diversity in the construction sector. And what we found was that people were spending money on doing diversity initiatives and programmes, but nobody was looking at the benefit and the impact of it. And so the report became a good practice study, and we pulled out case studies. We interviewed, we had roundtables, we looked across the sector to see what was being done. And that is available online from EHRC and should be available on the Catalytic website. Following that report, we saw the formation of the leadership group for fairness, inclusion and respect, because one of the things that we flagged up in the study was that the term diversity in the industry caused people to glaze over. But when we talked to people about what we were really meaning about diversity, that fundamentally it was about respecting other people for who they were, for what they brought, and what they could add, what value they could add to a business and the workforce. And that FIR acronym has become threaded across the whole sector. We then move on to 2015 and we see the ICE. I'm just picking them up as one notable example, mainly because they were the first in the sector to start doing something significant. And we saw them participate in the WISE 10 Steps programme, and there is a report on their first strategy and the disruptive diversity paper that Dawn Bonfield wrote for them. We then see progress with the professional bodies and trade associations across the engineering construction sector, and the adoption and use of the diversity and inclusion progression framework, which really saw a step up in the way that organisations were addressing diversity and inclusion. But the thing of note, which is what I want to talk to you about today, is the diversity and inclusion in ISO. The sector and engineering more broadly is really familiar with these international standards. So I want to tell you a little bit more about that. And if you're thinking, how was construction involved in it? Let me tell you and reassure you that a guy called Kevin Boucher, who was one of the diversity team for the Olympic Park development was a key member of the development of the ISO, and I'll be sharing a link to the video from the BSI, which was an introduction to the ISO that you can go watch at your leisure. So why do we need a standard? A number of reasons. A standard really underlines and recognises the importance of a particular topic, and it provides within it practical guidance about how you can ramp up what you're doing and move towards working at that standard. We're really familiar with the environmental standards around quality and control around manufacturing, and so it just makes absolute sense that within diversity and inclusion we're creating a common language. We've got a tool and a framework that's accessible across all levels of experience, but also we've got a documented framework that is relevant across organisations, different contexts, different locations globally, but also that it's relevant across sectors. And in this case, it's about maturity, about growing and moving forward and not trying to look back and criticise ourselves, but it's around moving forwards. Because I'm a firm believer, ever since I launched the first dashboard for women in science in 1999, that what gets measured gets done. There's a mantra of the European Commission for the Women in Science unit, which has evolved over time to address much broader diversity issues. So let's have a little bit more of a look at the ISO, but also the journey to its creation. It's not something that was just thought up over lockdown, but for sure it was impacted a little bit by lockdown. So what's the context for it? So the journey and the development of the ISO is built on a long history of knowledge and expertise globally. One of the key driving people behind it was a guy called Ephraim Henderson. And if you don't know about Ephraim, go and find out who he is. And he's written a couple of books, and he runs Henderson Works in America, a great consulting company in this field. So there were 6 years in development, because that's a lot of different countries that need to agree on what is the context and content of the standard. It was drafted with lots of different people from different sectors. There was a massive consultation process that took place, and that was done over COVID with sometimes several meetings a week between these important panel people. And then it was finalised and it was finally adopted in the UK in February 2021. It worked alongside other British standards around employment, and in May 2023 it now replaces BS 76005, so this is now the framework that you should be using when you're looking at employment and your whole organisational approach to diversity and inclusion. Now you'll remember that at the very beginning I said that a lot of diversity initiatives have been too action focused, that we've been really busy doing things. We have programmes, we have initiatives, but we're not necessarily very good at measuring outcomes. And so this framework model here provides the sort of background context to the ISO, and when we look at some of the elements within it, you will be able to recognise we've got governance, we've got leadership, we've got designated responsibilities, human resource life cycle, and it's human resource life cycle is really a significant part of the ISO. But it looks at the inclusive culture, it looks at policies and procedures, and it also looks at our stakeholders. And importantly, the products and services that we're delivering within our business. So again, I refer you back to the brilliant BSI website, and I know that Rebecca's going to be sending you a copy of my slides out in a PDF, along with a couple of important and useful links. So one of the challenges is about how do we get knowledge and information about the standard out there? Because if people aren't adopting the standard across the whole of an industry, then we have to ask ourselves, is it really a standard? And I don't know if you could just pop into the chat. Does anybody know, is everybody aware of the standard? I'm hoping everybody's going to go yes, 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 yes. So either just put a thumbs up with your reactions or just type yes into the chat if you're aware of ISO 40315. So yes, 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 brilliant, thank you, which is really reassuring to me. So the inclusion score isn't necessarily the only online tool that you can use to help you with the framework. You can go and download the ISO. I think it's £260 from the BSI, and so feel free to go and access that. But actually, when you're managing such a large framework, having an online tool with a project management embedded within it makes it suddenly much more usable by everybody within your organisation. You're able to use the tool inside the SaaS app to assign tasks to people and monitor progress and collect documentation. Suddenly it's in one place. You're not having to pull things together to do your reporting. So how do you use it? So there you can, as mentioned, you can download it from BSI. It's £260, or if you're a member of the BSI, you get 50% off. So the inclusion score is a web-based SaaS tool with full support, documentation, and reporting that is mapped into this action assignment system, and it's totally built around the ISO. And the kind of strap line that they use is the greater than or equal to. Diversity is greater or equal to inclusion. And that there are lots of different pillars and frameworks within it. And I'll just give you some insight into that. So this is constituted from the perspective of what is the risk to your organisation that you need to consider, and you need to in future be able to report on to your insurance broker, particularly when you're going forward for your renewal. There are 32 identified risk domains across diversity and inclusion that you need to be addressing as an organisation, and therefore you intentionally need to build these into your business processes. And we'll see that the inclusion score has adopted a maturity framework to help you assess where you are just at 3 simple levels of action. Talk about those a little bit more in later. So there's 32 risk domains. There are 27 types of diversity that are captured within the ISO. And those need to be acknowledged for each of those 32 risk domains. And that is when you start looking at the difference. So I've put them into this lovely wholesome apple here. You know, it goes all the way from neurodiversity, gender, marital status, looks at geographic location. You know, that starts looking at how we can be biased against somebody because of their regional accent, let alone working in a different country to someone else and having preconceptions of how they are and how our systems and processes might exclude them. But it covers all the other sort of not just the UK's protected characteristics, but that whole kind of sphere of difference. And that is aside from that diversity within the fact that there are 8 billion, nearly 8 billion different people on the planet. And these are things that these characteristics appear both in legal cases around diversity and inclusion, but also in terms of the frameworks, the policies and processes within the way that an organisation recruits, retains and supports its employees, but also how they might end up leaving. So there are 4 types of projects that have been identified in the ISO that can characterise how you go about tackling your ED&I programme. There are training activities you might get engaged in, data extraction activities, internal infrastructure, but also your external infrastructure. So I've just pulled out a couple of example questions and a couple of the sort of subdomains for you to have a look at, and then we can maybe have a little bit more of a Q&A. So just as an example of a question that you that you would phrase when you look at the standard. So in the governance category, And you'll remember that in the sphere I showed you, that was the one at the very top. It's number 5.1. Have you determined senior leadership accountability for establishing D&I principles and strategic objectives, including the provision of resources to achieve them, and embedding D&I principles into the organisational culture? And there are there's level 1, which is a zero level, but maturity levels. Are you reactive? Yes, our process, but our process is reactive. So we are doing things, but it's not something that we are planning to do. We have a proactive process, but it's not under control, and we have a measurable process that is under regular critique. So those 3 levels of development that you've established in your organisation. And of course, in some instances, you may have no activity because it's not particularly relevant to your organisation. You may choose not to take the full ISO in any one year, and you may be choosing to prioritise specific activities, in which case you won't look at it and you'll just score yourselves a 0 in that. But you've done it with intention. And that's what's really important about all of this. So if we dive down a little bit further into the governance level, we've got this about the senior leadership accountability. And in the tool, you're simply able to score yourselves at the 3 levels of maturity. And then in that column in the middle, I don't know if my mouse will shows here, it will give you an average for your score, which will then appear on your radar diagram. Under 5.1, there's another level of progress. Are you demonstrating and role modelling behaviours that are required by the D&I principles, shared values and beliefs? And what are you here? Have you got, we're doing something, but it's just reactive to something that somebody asks or challenges us on? Are you proactive, but it's not measured, so it's not under control? Or is it measurable and under regular critique? So we really have a handle on our intentional activity or strategy or process, but we are reviewing it and adjusting it as we go forward. Are you challenging behaviour that is inconsistent with diversity and inclusion principles and ensuring that people who challenge inappropriate behaviour and those that are affected by it are protected and supported? So these aren't one stroke kind of, if you were doing a survey of progress. And I did work on a development of a tool for professional societies as part of a National Science Foundation project in the United States over the last few years. The social scientists on our advisory board were not liking these multiple items within a question. And so it was a really interesting conversation about having these multiple layers. And I think it's really important because it allows us to be saying, really move through the maturity. We might be doing one of the things in there, but we're not doing all of them and we're not measuring and reviewing them. So let's dig. These are the screen snips, so I can't make it any bigger, but I think you can, when you get the slides, you'll be able to zoom them in. So I apologise for that. So this takes you down to the into the human resource life cycle piece of the which is the risk category, but also this one in particular looks at the subcategory of learning and development. So I've got 4 example statements in here for you. One of them is the learning development, and those 3 other ones are from performance management, and a wonderful domain of frustration and sense people feeling criticised within organisations and feeling left out. So again, you can read through, I won't read all of them out to you, but as an illustration on performance management, does your team ensure that the D&I principles and strategic objectives are included in performance management objectives, and that the focus is on the job performance attributes rather than group characteristics? And so you're able to give yourself the value here. So the spreadsheet goes across with further details. And there's also illustrations within Inclusion Score that gives you examples of the things that you can do and examples of policies and procedures that you can then use and adopt, and check that you've got your language right. in terms of having that maturity as you go through it. And so again, you would give yourself that score between choose where you are on that, and then it would then be aggregated for the risk category. But you can also get your radar diagram just for subcategories. So if you've got a team of people who've been assigned to look at that risk category or the subcategory, you're able to help them look at the progress that they are making, and then they can report that, and it aggregates it back, so you have high level reporting to your EDI committee, advisory group, and hopefully your board as well. But it also gives you that useful document to then present to your insurer at the end of the year when you're going for renewal, saying, you know, this is where we have an exposure, but we are working on it, and we're looking at how we can manage those risks. So I'm just going to scoot on to the next slide. Hopefully those of you who are interested, you could do yourself a screenshot, but you will be getting the slides. What are you doing in terms of what's the risk? This is a risk category of inclusive culture, and here are a few example statements from this this category. So just picking out one, I was going for the randomly for the third level down. Does your 7.2.3, does your team communicate behavioural expectations that promote the importance of inclusive, respectful behaviour and prevention of harassment, microaggression, and any form of retaliation? So in this example here, they scored themselves as a 2, which is still saying that we have we've got a reactive process in place. So it's, we're doing something, but we are not doing nothing. So this is improvement over actually doing nothing on everything. So I'm going to take you down to the next level so that you can have a look at organisational leadership as distinct from governance. So risk category of leadership, and so this, I've done a snip of 4 statements here, 2.1 down to 2.4, and it's mapped across to the statements within the ISO. So there's always that direct correlation. So if you've been doing it yourself using the ISO download, you're able always to then retrofit it and put it back into this online platform. And overall, you can see that the inclusion score given to these four risk categories is 2.29 based on the average of the score across the that category. And again, we'll see that in a radar diagram coming up shortly. So in terms of organisational leadership, some of the things that I know, that because I know some of the names of people that are registered, you're really going to be going, yes, of course, yes, of course. And I'm hopefully you, or if those of you who aren't familiar with the standard, you'll be going, of course, yes, that's great to see that in there. It's about having principles and strategic objectives at a really high level, but it's around allocating the right resources. A lot of programs fail, as we know, because they're under-resourced, either with funding or personnel or expertise. And so having the right resource obviously means you're going to have greater success. And so this organisation, are you, and this particular line, I7, are you, which is 2.3 as well, are you facilitating a positive organisational culture by establishing D&I expectations and accountability? Communicating these to all stakeholders, not just internal, all stakeholders, and fostering inclusive relationships and shared values with an increasingly diverse workforce, consumer base and supply chains. Oh, I meant to read that out, the one above. Sorry, I meant to read the one that's scoring 4, where we've got a measurable process that's under regular critique. And you could start thinking about the kinds of activities that an organisation that would be moving the one I did read out into that level 4, where you've got this really rich and deep programme of activities going out, you know, securing procurement from a diverse supply chain, just as an illustration. Okay, so how does it then look in terms of measuring progress? So here is an example output, the compliance radar of actions and measures. And so obviously, when we dive down, we can go down into all the different elements of this. You may choose to do a review of your get your inclusion score on a quarterly basis as you're updating things depending on the requirement for your internal reporting. You may do it once a year. You may also choose to have your progress audited by inclusion score as an organisation, and obviously that would be something that would require much more connection and services from inclusion score. So, but what you're able to do here is to show the radar plot of progress. So we're looking here at outcomes. And so I've thrown quite a lot of information at you. So I'm interested in those talking around those of you perhaps who are already using the standard within your organisation. And do you have any other questions around this? And do you think it's a useful approach? So, so if you're further curious, then I can organise to schedule a demo of the platform to have a look at. You can try it for yourself. So there is the URL to go and register and have a try and a play, see what the standard looks like and how you might answer it. But also you might be using the ISO and might be interested in helping hand in terms of getting your team more conversant with the language and having some insights into documentation that you could access through the resources that are available on the inclusion score platform. So throwing lots of things at you. So thank you very much for your time and for listening.